Greetings. We're in this series of videos where we're trying to produce this metric, a yardstick to measure the efficiency of the outcome. We started that by looking at a story that said that we really want to build this metric, and we're assuming no government intervention. So we had two parties. We had consumers, and we had producers, firms, buyers and sellers, whatever you want to think about this, okay? And we already did consumer surplus. Consumer surplus was the surplus to consumers net of their value of the product net of what they had to pay. By definition, every time they buy something and you pass over this little sheet of green piece of paper for it, they're giving up something else, okay? So we have to say they gave it to you without a gun to their head means that they're getting something back which they think is in excess of this. They would never give you $1 for something that's only going to value them 95 cents. That just doesn't make sense. All right. Now we want at this side. We want to look at the producer side. So we're going to introduce a new idea, and it's going to be called producer surplus. And again, we'll use it PS. And this definition is a little bit more detailed. The definition says it's the net revenue above what is needed to have that unit of production on the market. And, we're going to draw a graph about it, of course, but I want to start by just talking about the intuition of this. We know back in the day, we first constructed a supply curve, and the definition of a supply curve said, how much output will firms be willing to give to the market for different possible prices, okay? As you quote different prices, firms will say, okay, at that price, we're going to push Q0 out. At a higher price, we're going to push more out. The supply curve was an upward sloping line, okay? But there was the collection of points. If you've done a good job of actually building a statistical real model of what the supply curve looks like, you know that is a collection of points that will tell how much firms will actually put in the market for different possible prices. So let's think about this. We now want to know what's the net above what it needs to produce those, and so we're gonna do this by drawing our supply curve. So we'll put an axis system, and we'll have price on the vertical axis, and we'll have quantity on the horizontal axis. And we thought about supply curves that look like this. And we're going to use linear when and if I get around to giving you some problems that you have to solve. I'll make sure to stick to a nice, smooth, straight line so you don't have to worry about the quadratic function. But right now I just sort of drew it up, and it's upward sloping, and that's what matters to me. This is a supply curve. And what the supply curve says is that it tells us for different possible prices, pick any price, this price will give exactly this amount of production. No more, no less, okay? If you quote this price, firms are going to produce this. So I'm going to draw it and just put this on here. Pick an arbitrary price, P0. At that price, firms will offer Q0 units. Now, they're not offering Q1, because if you want them to come out here to Q1, you got to give them a higher price. Okay? That's just what we learned when we did theory of costs. We looked at the marginal cost was the response function of the firms to different possible prices. And the sum of those marginal costs, which, of course, I should write that in here, because we know that the supply curve is nothing other than the sum from I equals 1 to n of the marginal costs of these firms. Quote a price, the firm takes that price as given and says, well, at that price, my profit maximizing output is where I set marginal revenue. This price equal to marginal cost, this upward sloping line, and I get an output. And I take all of the firms in the industry, add them up, and I now know what market output is for that quoted price. And for a lower price, the market would say, well, at that price, I can only afford to give you this amount. Okay? At this price, I would give you all the way out to here. So let's understand that suppose this happens to be the market price, I'm just going to redraw it. I'm going to give you a cleaner picture, and we'll talk it through again, because I think it makes more sense. And as I am oftentimes prone to say, I have the pen. So we put price here, and we put quantity here, and we just drew a supply curve, and it looks something like this. And now suppose the market price is actually P0. Well, at P0, the market price, firms are going to provide Q0. But what we know is that, in fact, this unit, let's call this unit Q sub alpha. This unit would have been supplied if you had just offered P alpha. By definition of your properly constructed supply curve, if the price had actually been P sub alpha, firms would have sold Q sub alpha out there. Otherwise, you've done a bad job of drawing your supply curve. By showing us that the supply curve is there, you know you're saying, gee, at a lower price, market output would have been less. Q alpha is less than Q0. So the fact of the matter is, the Q alpha unit gives us an excess of this gap. The firms are actually getting P0. The firms are actually getting P0 for their unit of production when they would have given it for just P alpha. Good deal for the firms. That's a piece of producer surplus. It's revenue in excess of what they would have taken to provide that unit. Well, we can do that for every unit. We could say, look, for this unit, let's call this Q sub beta, firms would have given us that unit at just P sub beta. But lucky them, the market is actually saying, here's what you get for it. There's one out here, let's call this Q sub 2. The market would have given you this unit for this price P sub 2, but in fact, they get P0. And so they get this vertical gap. All the firms in this market get a revenue driven by the market price that's in excess of what it would have taken given what their costs are. So producer surplus is the area below price, the area below price above marginal cost. See, this is the sum of marginal cost, I equals 1 to n for the I players in the industry. That's how we constructed supply. So the marginal cost curve is the marginal cost to society of resources burned up. This kind of shows what they are. But these firms are getting net of that vertical gap, which is a good deal for them.